Good evening, people. My name is Mary Weaver. Welcome to the fourth educational informational training session that we're having for the Iowa Women's Democratic Caucus. We always have these educational sessions the third Thursday of every month, beginning at 8 o'clock. We've had sessions on branding, abortion, education, assuring that public dollars are used for public schools. And tonight we're going to talk about the constitutional amendment regarding guns. The vision of the Iowa Women's Democratic Caucus is to empower Iowa women to exercise their rights, engage in public discourse, and make their voices heard at all levels of government. I want to begin tonight by thanking Diana Wright, our Boone County, Iowa Democratic Treasurer and manager of our social media streams. Diana is helping me tonight, and we're going to be able to assure that this recording, this video will be able to be seen by others if you want to tell them about the presentation. Temple Hyatt of Moms Demand Action was to be our speaker originally. I had heard Temple speak this past summer and asked her to present to our group. She agreed, but thankfully she has become so busy and so scheduled by people wanting to learn about this amendment that Leslie Carpenter stepped forward to substitute for her this evening. Excuse me. Leslie is a retired physical therapist and former EMS volunteer. She lives in Iowa City and has a passionate story to tell about why she is now a full-time volunteer with Moms Demand Action. We will take questions in and place them in the chat at the end of her presentation. I will look for your comments and read those questions to Leslie. We will conclude at 9 o'clock p.m. It is being live streamed and a recording will be available for anyone wishing to rewatch. So Leslie, welcome to the Women's Caucus.
Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to come in. Are you able to hear me okay?
I can hear you, Leslie.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for allowing me to come and speak with you. I am a volunteer with Moms Demand Action. I also am somebody who runs Iowa Mental Health Advocacy. That's where most people would probably know me from. I got involved with doing volunteer work with Moms Demand Action because of concerns regarding the amount of gun violence that we're seeing, and especially the number of gun suicides. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and move right into our presentation. So bear with me for a moment here. Okay, are you able to see that okay?
Yes, we can, Leslie.
All right, very good. So Iowans, of course, have the right to own a gun, and we have the U.S. Constitution that guarantees this. But this amendment doesn't do what it says it does. It's funded by out-of-state special interests who put profits over people. And instead of protecting our rights, this confusing amendment will weaken our current laws, make us less safe, and even put law enforcement in danger. This ballot measure will make it even harder for police and other law enforcement officers to enforce the law and to do their job. In November of 2022, Iowans will vote on a proposed amendment to the Iowa Constitution for the first time since 2010. Supporters call this amendment the Right to Firearms Amendment and describe it as the addition of the Second Amendment to Iowa's Constitution. In this presentation, you will learn why this description is misleading. Many public safety interest groups are recommending that the public vote no. These groups represent public health, gun violence prevention, domestic violence intervention, religious groups, and mental health organizations. The content you are going to hear today has been created by volunteers in the gun violence prevention movement. While we did get some input from those in the legal profession, we are not lawyers. If you have questions about the gun violence statistics and methodology, please visit everystat.org. Today, we'll look at gun violence in Iowa, along with the legislative changes over the past 5 years that have weakened Iowa's gun safety laws. Then, we'll review the ballot measure language and its potential impact based upon what we've seen happen in the 3 other states that currently have a similar version of this amendment. At the end, I hope you have a deeper understanding of why this proposed amendment is not simply the Second Amendment, but a more extreme version. So let's take a look at gun violence in Iowa, along with the public safety and legislative landscape. Overall, gun violence cost Iowa $4.2 billion each year. That's billion with a B. This cost includes state medical care, first responders, ambulances, police and criminal justice services related to gun violence. In Iowa, 78% of gun deaths are suicides and 19% are homicides. This is compared to 59% and 38% nationwide, respectively. In an average year, 302 people die and 489 are wounded by guns in Iowa. And currently, Iowa has the 38th highest rate of gun violence in the United States. That's what it is currently. That will change if we pass this amendment. This chart is a graph of Iowa's rate of gun deaths per 100,000 people. From 2011 through 2020, Iowa's rate of gun deaths has increased 56%. However, nationwide, this increase was only 33%. This means that in 2020, there were 131 more gun deaths than in 2011. In Iowa, the rate of both gun suicides and gun homicides saw a larger increase in this time than in the nation overall. Though the majority of gun deaths in Iowa are suicides, the state has seen a devastating increase in gun homicides over the past decade. Between 2011 and 2020, Iowa's gun homicide rate increased by 168%, a higher increase than experienced by 5 out of Iowa's neighboring 6 states. In 2020, guns were the second leading cause of death among children and teens in Iowa. Only motor vehicle accidents cause more deaths. Nationwide, firearms are now the leading cause of death for children and teens. Black people are disproportionately impacted by gun violence here in Iowa and are 16 times more likely than white people to die by gun homicide. Black children and teens are 6 times more likely than their white peers to die by guns. As you can see, Iowa is trending at an alarmingly higher rate than the national average. Many believe this is due in large part to the weakening of Iowa's gun safety laws. In 2017, Iowa passed a stand your ground law, which removed the duty to retreat before using force in self-defense. Stand your ground laws allow people to shoot to kill in public even when they can safely walk away from danger. In 2020, Iowa passed a preemptive law that effectively forced the removal of local gun safety laws. Locally, firearms are now permitted in municipal and county-owned spaces. A child visiting the library could open an adult's purse looking for a piece of gum and instead find a loaded handgun. This preemptive law also prevents cities and counties from passing future gun safety laws like the law recently passed in San Jose, California, that requires gun owners to purchase liability insurance. Due to the removal of Iowa's permitting laws in 2021, it is now legal for people to carry hidden, loaded handguns in public without a permit and without safety training. This bill also allowed people to purchase handguns from unlicensed sellers without background checks. And we did some polling recently where we found out that most people actually think we have more gun safety laws than we really have, and that's a concern. Unfortunately, there are many, many factors in Iowa that contribute to gun violence. However, the passage of these laws didn't reduce gun violence. They've simply allowed more guns into public spaces. In order to place a proposed amendment to the Iowa Constitution on the ballot, it must pass 2 successive General Assemblies. So let's take a closer look at the actual language that was passed. The ballot will read, "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The sovereign state of Iowa affirms and recognizes this right to be a fundamental individual right. Any and all restrictions of this right shall be subject to strict scrutiny." This is not the Second Amendment. The addition of the bolded phrase is not in the U.S. Constitution. Strict scrutiny is what makes this proposed amendment very different and very extreme. So, what is strict scrutiny and how will it potentially change things? Very simply, strict scrutiny is a legal test. It is the highest level of scrutiny a court can use to decide whether a law is unconstitutional. Under this amendment, judges would be forced to use an unusually stringent standard of review when considering legal challenges to any restrictive gun law. Strict scrutiny requires that a judge determine that a challenged law furthers a compelling government interest and is narrowly tailored to achieve that interest. The gun lobby claims that strict scrutiny amendments restore the right to keep and bear arms, when what they really do is threaten public safety laws, forcing judges to apply this highest judicial standard when analyzing firearm-related laws. This standard is not required by the Supreme Court's recent decision. University of Iowa law professor Todd Pettis has told us that strict scrutiny is a common constitutional standard of review to determine if individual rights are being violated. When a court applies strict scrutiny, the courts are demanding a compelling justification for interfering with these individual rights. Only a few states have adopted this extreme approach. Louisiana passed their amendment in 2012. Alabama and Missouri followed in 2014. In all 3 states, the state has had to defend against a flood of lawsuits, including by convicted felons and domestic abusers who challenge state gun prohibitions, putting taxpayers on the hook for the cost of that litigation. Polls show that the majority of Iowa voters, including gun owners, are in favor of Iowa's sensible restrictions on the purchase and use of firearms. Iowa's current laws keep felons from having firearms, keep perpetrators of domestic violence from having firearms, keep guns out of schools, and keep restrictions on machine guns and other offensive weapons. These are the types of laws, if challenged underneath this extreme version of the Second Amendment, might be declared unconstitutional. So let's look at what's happened in the 3 other states with a similar version of this proposed amendment. The 3 states with strict scrutiny are among those with the highest rates of gun deaths in the nation. Louisiana is 3rd, Alabama is 4th, and Missouri is 5th. And remember from earlier, I mentioned that Iowa currently is 38th. We really don't want to join these 3 states. Missouri's gun death rate is double that of Iowa. This extreme approach would invite frivolous litigation, undermine decades of case law in the state courts, and put in jeopardy many moderate common sense gun laws. Here are some examples. In Louisiana, after strict scrutiny passed, a convicted domestic abuser challenged the constitutionality of a state law prohibiting possession of a firearm by people convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence crimes. After strict scrutiny amendments passed in Louisiana and Missouri, convicted felons challenged state laws that prohibit felons from possessing firearms. And at least one lower court found that Louisiana's law prohibiting felons from having guns was unconstitutional. Fortunately, the Louisiana Supreme Court reversed this ruling. But of course, here in Iowa, we're pretty concerned because we know what our Supreme Court has been doing lately. Strict scrutiny would chill the ability of future legislatures and local governments to pass life-saving public safety measures. The Missouri State Auditor determined that Louisiana's strict scrutiny amendment had required significant time, effort, and expenditures by Louisiana's public defender and district attorney's offices, imposing significant workload and related costs on the Louisiana government. The auditor projected that a strict scrutiny amendment in Missouri would result in lawsuits costing Missouri taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. So for a quick recap, there are 3 things the strict scrutiny amendment will do. 1, threaten public safety laws by forcing judges to apply the highest judicial standard when analyzing firearm-related laws. 2, invite costly, frivolous lawsuits. And 3, restrict future legislatures from passing gun safety legislation. Clearly, this proposed amendment won't make Iowa safer. Ballot measures are very difficult to defeat, and as we've seen today, the language is oftentimes misleading. Many voters do not turn the ballot over or simply refrain from voting for fear of voting the wrong way. With supporters calling this effort the Freedom Amendment and promoting it as just the Second Amendment, we have our work cut out for us. So here are some ways that you can help with our efforts here in Iowa. Texting Iowa to 644-33 will take you to a landing page online so voters can learn more. That's probably the easiest thing to share with friends. There's also an option to sign a petition opposing Public Measure 1. Also share about this on social media and tag @MomsDemand and use the hashtag #IALegis to help more people to see it. You can get involved in the fight by writing a letter to the editor. If you're interested in doing that, you can reach out to us with the emails that we're going to share in just a moment. We have sample letters that you can use, and we hope that many people listening tonight might be willing to write letters to the editors of small hometown papers because those have an impact. We find that the local papers are read much more frequently than the bigger ones. You can go ahead and attend a nationwide weekend of action on October 29th. And you can invite others to hear this presentation if you're interested. And you can do all that by reaching out to this email of iowa@momschapterleaders.org. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and open this up for any questions that you might have.
Leslie, thank you very much. I have heard Temple, but either my listening skills were improved tonight or I'm learning more things. Thank you. One of the things that I have had a recent encounter with a gun advocate is that we were talking about this amendment and he said, oh, we must have it because Biden is going to come and take our guns. And how can I best respond to him?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that probably the thing to help them understand is that nobody is looking to take anybody's guns away who are safe. We know hunters have guns. We know people have guns for doing target practice and those kind of things. And we are not against people owning guns. we are for improved gun safety legislation to help keep those firearms out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. For instance, in my space in the mental health world, we hope to be able to someday have a red flag law so that we can temporarily remove the gun from a home of somebody who is feeling suicidal, because we know removal of means is the number one way to prevent suicides. Nobody, including President Biden, is interested in coming and taking away people's guns. We are for other things like helping people learn how to lock up their guns separately from their ammunition to keep everybody safe in the home and to keep it out of the hands of children. So those would be the things that I would say.
Do we, like if we send a letter to the editor, what should we include? The thing I learned tonight that I hadn't heard when I listened to Temple before was the potential for lots of taxpayer dollars being used for litigation. How can we quantify that?
Yeah, you can share some of the information that we had in the presentation in terms of those dollars that were predicted by the Missouri auditor when they were looking at what had happened in Louisiana. And the sample letters may allude to that. I don't know if they go into more specifics than that. Okay. And I will tell you that we also did some polling across the state. Every town did that for us. And one of the things that they found with our polling was that two things that really struck out to me. One is most people that answered the phone calls really believe we had a lot more safety legislation in place than we really have. So they thought, hey, this won't really do anything to impact us. They didn't realize how much we had been weakening the gun laws over the past 5 years. And the other thing was a lot of the people were not moved by the suicide numbers, but they were much more concerned about their own safety. They were much more concerned about that rise in the homicide rates. So that would be something that I would tell you would be wise to share, because apparently people are not motivated in an altruistic way. As much as in my space, again, I wish we would be motivated. It sounds like the average Iowan is more concerned about their own safety. So that was very interesting to me.
When a local sheriff told me, probably 3 or 4 months ago, that he used to be able to approve persons within Greene and Boone County getting a firearm permit. And now that right has been taken away. Can you talk about that, and when did that happen?
I can't tell you exactly the year that happened, but that happened several years ago, where they made it a shall issue instead of a may issue. And that's when the sheriffs had less ability to control who was able to get a gun permit.
Okay. I can't tell, Diana, I think you're going to have to look in the chats, because for some reason I can't see the questions. Are there questions that are coming up and that you can cut and paste? Oh, you're answering me. Let's see. No, there are no questions. Okay, that's if you're comfortable, Leslie, because we can go for a little bit longer. When you and I were talking about this presentation, you told me that why you had retired early from being a physical therapist. Are you comfortable in sharing that with the group?
Sure. So this isn't really so much to do with the mom stuff, but I retired early in 2019 from my career as a PT because we had a son with a very severe mental illness. He has a schizoaffective disorder. And over the course of the past 16 years in trying to get him care, we've run into so many barriers. And I realized that if I wanted to be doing the work to improve the mental health care system here in the state and as well as in the country, I needed a lot more time than I had while I was working full time. So now I spend my time doing advocacy work to improve the mental health care system locally and in the state and in the country. So I'm a registered lobbyist at the Iowa legislature. Don't be too impressed or appalled by that, because I'm not paid by anybody. That has been very much a very deliberate decision, because when you're not paid by anybody, you're not beholden to what they want, right? I can be pretty pure in advocating for the needs of people with serious schizophrenia, schizoaffective, and bipolar disorders, because the people that I'm really advocating for are not well enough to be at the State House themselves. Yeah. And my reason for volunteering with moms is that one of the first calls I had when I was an EMT, a volunteer EMT during my college years, was a gentleman had chosen to shoot himself to try to die by suicide while he was driving a truck past the emergency room of a hospital where his wife was working.
Oh.
And it was my very first call, and having to arrive and respond to that call and see the damage of that bullet, and then to have to take him to that ED where his wife was, and to see the devastation that caused her, it was unbelievable. It really was. And there is nothing that will ever stop those images from being there in my memory, I'm afraid. And most people have no idea the damage that a single bullet in a moment of impulse can do. But I've seen it, and it's awful. And honestly, the other thing I speak to often is suicide prevention, because our son has been suicidal many, many times. He's been hospitalized over 26 times. And unfortunately, only one medical provider ever asked us if we had a gun in our house. That just is awful. We should be asking about that much more, because families don't know that removal of means is the number one way to prevent a suicide. And we need to be more open about this and honest, because guns are lethal 90% of the time if they're the means someone uses to try to die by suicide. And most people don't know that. Other forms of suicide are not nearly as lethal, and we need to be doing a better job of educating people about it.
Wow. I'm speechless. I don't have a good comment. I'm sorry. And, but it's here, isn't it? Mm.
It is, but that's okay.
I'm gonna, since nobody's having any questions, and when we heard the debate between Deidre DeGere and Governor Reynolds Monday evening, and the governor was talking about all the things that were improving in mental health, and then candidate DeGere talked about the gentleman, the father from Dubuque, that wanted to get attention for his son who was threatening suicide, and went to the emergency room, and then was told he couldn't get in to see anyone for 3 months, but there was a bed in Sioux City, and that would be a long ways from Dubuque. And is that happen frequently, or can you respond to that? I'm not asking you to question the governor or Deidre, but is that a frequent situation?
It's extremely frequent. We have had a lot of improvements, and to give the governor credit, she's been supportive of a lot of them. What she did not support this last legislative session was adding beds. We wanted to add beds at the state hospitals, which would then snowball and open up more beds at our private hospitals. Because Iowa is ranked 51st in the country for our number of state beds. And even when you put in the private beds to that, we only have about 750 beds across the state. We should have somewhere in the range of about 1,800. So we are direly short of beds. And so, yes, even with the changes we've had, it hasn't really improved the ability of a family to get a loved one the care that they need, both for acute care, hospitalizations, but also for the long-term supportive community living. Things are being done. We have great leadership at DHS and the new combined Health and Human Services Department. but we have a lot more work to do. So both were kind of correct in their comments. It's just that there's not a whole lot more access yet for people in acute care.
Okay. Well, I don't want to belabor it. Leslie, thank you. Thank you so much. And you've put the webs or the email sites on so that people can see those. I think we'll probably go ahead and conclude this session. The next educational program will be November 17th at 8:00 p.m. And I anticipate that we will have, I hope we have an opportunity for several, but that we'll have at least 2 or 3 of the victorious female candidates from the election that we'll be interviewing and talking with about why they were successful, and then upcoming topics that we should start to prepare for the legislative session. Thank you, and we'll conclude with that. Take care.